The child's footsteps echoed too loudly for a building like this. Tiana Brooks felt it before she heard it, the sudden absence of weight at her side, the sharp intake of her own breath. She turned, mop slipping from her hands, heart slamming into her ribs. Eden! Too late. Her toddler had already slipped free, small sneakers slapping against polished stone as she ran down a restricted corridor no janitor was ever supposed to enter. Red lights blinked faintly along the ceiling. Security doors. Executive floors. People froze. Other cleaning staff stared, then looked away, fear tightening their faces. One woman whispered, "Get her. Now." Another shook her head. "That floor belongs to him." Tiana's stomach dropped. Everyone in the building knew the rule. You did not run. You did not draw attention. And you never ever approached Marcus Vale. She'd only been on this night shift for a month. 4 weeks of staying invisible. 4 weeks of keeping her head down, her voice low, her child hidden in supply closets when she had no one else to watch her. Tonight Eden had slipped. Tiana rushed forward just as the elevator at the end of the hall opened. Silence fell like a held breath. Marcus Vale stepped out. Dressed in dark precision. The kind of man conversations died around. His presence didn't rush, it claimed space. Security straightened. Radios went quiet. Eden didn't slow. She ran straight toward him. Tiana opened her mouth to scream, but the sound never came. Because Marcus Vale didn't move. And when the child reached him, instead of fear or resistance, she wrapped her arms around his leg and held on. The most feared man in the city froze. By morning, the building wore a different face. In daylight, it looked like any other glass tower. Sleek lines, mirrored windows, quiet efficiency. Executives arrived with coffee and confidence. Assistants moved briskly, heels clicking, voices low. Nothing about it suggested fear. But everyone inside knew the truth. This building belonged to Marcus Vale. Not on paper. Not in public records. But in the way conversations stopped when his private elevator chimed. In the way security checked badges twice and never joked on the executive floors. In the way decisions were made quickly, cleanly, without debate. Because Marcus Vale disliked repetition. Tiana had learned that in her first week. She'd seen a manager fired without raised voices. Watched a vendor escorted out mid-sentence. Not because anyone shouted, but because Marcus Vale had looked at them once and said, "We're done." That was it. No arguments. No appeals. Control here wasn't loud. It was absolute. People said he ran half the city through shell companies and silence. That he never threatened, never begged, never explained. That if Marcus Vale wanted something, it simply happened. If he didn't, it disappeared. Tiana kept her head down and her thoughts to herself. She cleaned floors no one else touched. Offices that smelled of money and restraint. She worked nights so she wouldn't be seen, moving through hallways like she wasn't really there. That was the rule she lived by now. Be useful, be invisible, survive. She told herself she didn't need to know more. But it was hard to ignore a presence that bent the air around it. Even now, as staff hovered at a careful distance down the hall, no one rushed forward to take Eden from Marcus Vale's side. No one spoke. They waited because waiting was safer than guessing. Marcus stood still, looking down at the small child gripping his leg like it was the most natural thing in the world. His face showed nothing. No anger. No surprise. Just a pause where movement should have been. Tiana watched his hand flex once at his side, slow and deliberate, as if he were choosing what kind of man he would be next. In a building that answered to him, in a city shaped by his decisions, everything waited on that choice. Including her. Tiana Brooks had learned early that survival wasn't about strength. It was about not being noticed. She moved through the building like a shadow, badge tucked away, shoulders slightly rounded, eyes always lowered. She cleaned after hours so fewer people could remember her face. When someone spoke to her, she answered softly. When they didn't, she didn't mind. Silence was safer. In her first week, another janitor had tried to make conversation near the executive floors. He laughed too loudly, asked the wrong question, lingered where he shouldn't have. By the next night, his name was already gone from the schedule. No explanation. No farewell. Tiana adjusted quickly. She memorized which hallways were watched and which cameras blinked red a second longer than the rest. She learned when the elevators slowed and when they didn't stop at all. She learned that some doors were cleaned once and never again, because they belonged to Marcus Vale. Most of all, she learned to disappear. What she hadn't learned was how to stop being desperate. The sitter she used when she could afford one had stopped answering her calls. Her sister worked nights. Daycare cost more than her rent. And rent was already late, again. The notice sat folded in her pocket, edges worn thin from being touched too often. So she brought Eden with her. Just for one night, she'd told herself. She'd done it before in other buildings. Supply closets, break rooms, quiet corners where no one looked twice. Eden usually slept through her shifts, small and warm and breathing softly in her carrier. Tonight had been different. Eden had woken restless, squirming with the stubborn energy of a child who didn't understand rules or fear or ownership. Tiana had tried to soothe her with whispers, with snacks, with promises she didn't know how to keep. Just stay close, she'd murmured. Just for a little while. She never saw the moment Eden slipped away. Now, standing frozen in a hallway she was never meant to enter, Tiana felt every carefully built layer of invisibility peel away. Every choice that had led her here pressed down at once, every missed payment, every swallowed word, every night she'd chosen survival over safety. She watched her child at the feet of the most powerful man in the building and understood, with terrifying clarity, that staying invisible had finally failed her. And she had nothing left to hide behind. It happened in the space between one breath and the next. One moment, Eden was at Tiana's side, fingers curled into the strap of her bag, humming to herself as Tiana wiped down a glass railing. The next, the weight was gone. The soft tug at her hip vanished, replaced by a sudden, hollow panic. Tiana straightened too fast. Her heart jumped. "Eden!" she whispered, already turning. The corridor stretched longer than it should have. Too clean. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't belong to night shifts or tired workers. Her eyes scanned the polished floor, the mirrored walls, the intersecting hallways that all looked the same if you didn't know where they led. Then she saw it. A small reflection, distorted in the glass. Tiny legs moving fast, a flash of light-up sneakers disappearing around the corner. No! Tiana's mop clattered to the floor. She moved without thinking, shoes sliding slightly on the marble as she hurried forward. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. That corner led to the executive wing. She knew because she'd been warned. Because the doors were darker there. Because the air itself seemed heavier, as if sound didn't travel the same way. No cleaning schedules. No approved routes. Just space that belonged to someone else. Tiana slowed for half a second, fear catching up to her reason. Then she ran. "Eden!" Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to, slicing through the stillness. Somewhere behind her, a radio crackled. Footsteps paused. A voice muttered something urgent. The lights ahead shifted, dimmer, more deliberate. Red indicators blinked above a set of doors she had never once touched. Too late. The elevator chimed. The sound echoed down the corridor, deep and final, like a door closing on a life she couldn't afford to lose. Tiana skidded to a stop just as the doors at the far end slid open. She saw Eden then, small, determined, completely unafraid, running straight toward a man who stood waiting as if the building itself had delivered her to him. Tiana's breath left her in a rush. Every rule she had learned, every warning she had followed, every careful step she had taken to stay unseen, all of it collapsed in that single, irreversible moment. Because her child had been lost for only seconds. And in those seconds everything had changed. Marcus Vale did not hurry. He stepped out of the elevator with the unhurried certainty of a man who expected the world to adjust to him. The doors closed softly behind him, sealing the sound like a verdict. Conversation died mid-breath. Somewhere a radio clicked off. He was taller than Tiana expected, dressed in a dark coat that fell perfectly into place, as if it had been measured for this exact moment. His face was calm, unreadable. Not angry, not curious, just aware. The kind of awareness that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. Security shifted, hands hovering near earpieces, waiting for instruction that didn't come. Marcus's gaze swept the corridor once. Slow, precise, taking in the frozen staff, the dropped mop, the woman standing too far inside a restricted wing. Then his eyes lowered. To the child. Eden had stopped running. She stood directly in front of him now, head tilted back, studying his face with open fascination. No fear. No hesitation. Just quiet interest, as if he were something new and worth understanding. Tiana felt her chest lock. "I'm sorry," she said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. Her voice sounded too loud, too thin in the vast stillness. She's mine. I'll take her." "I didn't mean." Marcus raised a hand. The smallest gesture, barely more than a shift of fingers. But it stopped her cold. Stopped everyone. His eyes never left Eden. For a moment that stretched too long, nothing happened. The building seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a reaction it had learned to fear. Then Eden did something no one expected. She took a step forward. Before anyone could move, she wrapped her arms around Marcus Vale's leg and held on, pressing her cheek against his coat like it was familiar, like it belonged to her. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the hallway. Marcus froze. Not stiffly. Not defensively. Still. His hand hovered midair, uncertain. His jaw tightened once, the only sign that anything inside him had shifted at all. Tiana's knees nearly gave out. She expected anger, orders, consequences she couldn't outrun. Instead, Marcus looked down at the child clinging to him as if trying to solve a problem he had never planned for. And for the first time since he stepped into the hallway, the man everyone feared did not seem entirely in control. Eden held on as if she had always belonged there. Her small fingers fisted in the fabric of Marcus Vale's coat, wrinkling material that probably cost more than Tiana's monthly rent. She shifted her weight, pressing closer, a soft sigh escaping her as if she'd found something solid after a long search. The hallway remained frozen. Security didn't move. No one reached for the child. No one spoke. It was as if the rules had shattered and no one knew which ones still applied. Tiana took a step forward before she could stop herself. "Eden," she whispered, panic clawing up her throat. "Baby, come back to me." Eden didn't even look at her. She rested her head against Marcus's leg, cheek turned sideways, eyes already drifting half-closed. The fearless certainty of a child who hadn't learned yet what fear was supposed to look like. Marcus's breath slowed. Up close, Tiana could see the tension in him. Not explosive, not violent, but restrained, coiled deep beneath stillness. His hand lowered an inch, then stopped again, hovering awkwardly, as though he'd forgotten the shape of simple gestures. "She doesn't do that," Tiana said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "She cries when strangers get close. She hates being touched." Marcus finally spoke. "Does she?" he said quietly. His voice was even, controlled, but something underneath it had shifted. Eden chose that moment to adjust her grip, small arms tightening briefly before relaxing again. A contented sound left her throat, barely audible, but it landed like thunder in the silence. Marcus's hand moved. Slowly, carefully. He rested it, not on the child, but against his own leg, just beside her head, as if afraid that even accidental contact might break something fragile. The building exhaled. Tiana watched his face change in increments so small she almost missed them. The rigid line of his mouth eased. His gaze softened, not warm, not gentle, but focused in a way that felt dangerously close to concern. "How old?" he asked. Tiana swallowed. 3. Marcus nodded once, absorbing that as if it mattered. Eden lifted her head then, just long enough to look up at him. Their eyes met, hers open and curious, his dark and searching. Whatever she saw there made her smile. The man who ruled the building, the city, entire unseen networks of power, stood rooted to the spot while a child decided he was safe. And nothing in Marcus Vale's world had prepared him for that. Marcus's gaze lifted from the child to the woman standing a few steps away. "You," he said. The word was not sharp, but it carried weight. It always did. Tiana felt it settle on her shoulders like a hand she couldn't shake off. "Yes," she answered because she didn't know what else to say. "Your name?" "Tiana Brooks." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "She's my daughter. Eden." Marcus studied her the way he studied balance sheets and people who lied for a living, without expression, without hurry. His eyes moved over her uniform, the worn shoes, the way her hands were clenched tight at her sides. "You work nights?" "Yes." "Why?" The question landed heavier than it should have. "Not how long. Not who hired you." "Oui." Tiana hesitated. She could feel every pair of eyes still fixed on them, the entire building listening without daring to breathe. This was the moment she should have apologized again. Promised to leave. Begged. Instead she told the truth. "Because nights pay more," she said quietly. "And because I don't have anyone to watch her." Marcus glanced down as Eden shifted slightly, still pressed against him. "You brought a child into this building." "Yes." "Do you understand where you are?" "Yes." "Then explain it." Tiana's throat tightened. Fear flared, but something else rose with it. Exhaustion. Months of carrying everything alone. "I didn't have a choice," she said. "I can't miss shifts. Can't afford childcare. I can't afford to be late. I clean what I'm told to clean and I leave before anyone notices me. I wasn't trying to disrespect anything." Marcus's jaw flexed once. "You were trying to survive." It wasn't a question. Tiana met his gaze. For the first time she didn't look away. "Yes." The silence stretched again, thick and uneasy. Somewhere behind Marcus, security waited for a signal that didn't come. "You could have lied," Marcus said. "Most people do." "I know," Tiana replied. "But lying doesn't keep a roof over our heads." Something shifted then, not loudly, not visibly, but enough to tilt the balance of the moment. Marcus looked at Eden again, then back at Tiana. "Take her," he said. Tiana stepped forward, heart pounding, arms already lifting. "Not yet." She froze. Marcus lowered himself slightly, bending at the knee just enough that Eden's grip loosened on its own. He didn't touch her. Didn't pry her away. He simply waited. Power, Tiana realized, wasn't always about command. Sometimes it was about knowing when not to use it. Eden released her grip on her own. It happened slowly, without tears or protest. She leaned back just enough for Tiana to step in, lifting her into familiar arms. Eden rested her head against Tiana's shoulder, one hand still curled in the air as if something solid had only just slipped away. The hallway didn't return to normal. Couldn't. Marcus straightened, smoothing the front of his coat where small wrinkles remained. He glanced at security, and with a single look, dismissed them. Radios came back to life. Footsteps retreated. People remembered how to breathe. "Come with me," he said. Tiana's stomach dropped. "Sir, That wasn't a request." She nodded because nodding was easier than thinking. They moved through doors she'd never been allowed near, into a corridor that smelled faintly of cedar and quiet. Marcus walked ahead without checking if she followed. He already knew she would. His office was vast but spare. Glass walls. Dark wood. A city laid out below like something owned rather than admired. Marcus gestured to a chair. Tiana sat, Eden heavy and warm against her chest. "You can't work nights anymore," Marcus said. The words hit her harder than any threat. "I need this job." "You won't lose it." Her heart stuttered. "Then what?" "You'll work days. On my floor." He paused. "Where she can be seen." Tiana blinked. "Seen?" "There will be childcare," Marcus continued. "Security. Structure." His gaze flicked briefly to Eden. "Protection." The word carried weight. promise and warning in equal measure. I don't understand, Tiana said. Why are you doing this? Marcus considered the question. He didn't answer right away. Because, he said finally, bringing you closer is safer than pretending tonight didn't happen. The truth of it settled like a chill. This wasn't kindness. It wasn't charity. It was proximity. Being near Marcus Vale meant insulation from certain dangers, and exposure to others. It meant being protected and watched at the same time. I don't belong here, Tiana said. No, Marcus agreed. You don't. He leaned back slightly, studying her the way he studied everything he intended to keep under control. But your daughter walked into my life without fear, he continued. And I don't ignore variables I don't understand. Tiana tightened her hold on Eden. She had wanted safety, stability, chance to breathe. Instead, she was being offered something far more dangerous. A place too close to power to be invisible anymore. Marcus didn't speak again until the city lights began to come on. They stood by the window, silence stretching comfortably this time, not sharp like before. Eden had fallen asleep against Tiana's shoulder, her breathing slow and even, unaware of how much ground she'd shifted simply by existing. I used to hate children, Marcus said. The words landed without warning. He didn't look at Tiana when he said them. His gaze fixed on the streets below. Cars moved like veins of light, orderly and distant. Tiana waited. She had learned by now that silence was often an invitation. They were loud. Unpredictable, he continued. They remind you that control is temporary. He exhaled slowly. Not a sigh, something closer to release. I had a brother, Marcus said. Younger. He followed me everywhere. Thought I was invincible. His mouth tightened briefly. I taught him the wrong things too early. How to be tough. How not to cry. Tiana's grip on Eden tightened instinctively. There was a night, Marcus went on. His voice quieter now, stripped of its edge. I told him to stay inside. I was late. He came looking for me. The room felt smaller. I built an empire after that, Marcus said. Power. Control. I made sure no one could ever take something from me again. He turned at last, meeting Tiana's eyes. It didn't bring him back. The words weren't bitter, just final. Tiana swallowed. I'm sorry. Marcus nodded once, accepting it without ceremony. When your daughter ran to me, he said, glancing down at Eden's sleeping face, she didn't see what everyone else sees. She didn't hesitate. That's because she doesn't know who you are, Tiana said gently. No, Marcus replied. It's because she doesn't care. The realization seemed to unsettle him more than fear ever had. For years, he said, everyone around me learned to move carefully. Even children learned to look away. He paused. Yours didn't. The city hummed outside, indifferent. I don't believe in second chances, Marcus said. But I believe in moments that expose truth. He stepped back, giving Tiana space she hadn't realized he'd been holding. What happened tonight, he said, wasn't an accident. Tiana looked down at Eden, then back at him. She understood now. This wasn't about the past alone. It was about what Marcus Vale had spent a lifetime avoiding, and what a child had reached for without knowing why. The days that followed did not return to normal. They settled into something quieter, heavier. Tiana moved through the building in daylight now, Eden's routine woven carefully into spaces that had once rejected both of them. People noticed her, but differently. Conversations paused, then resumed. Eyes followed, then looked away. No one asked questions. Marcus Vale had decided. That was enough. Eden adjusted faster than anyone expected. She grew familiar with the soft hum of elevators, the way sunlight spilled across the executive floor in the afternoons. Sometimes Marcus would pass by without stopping. Sometimes he would pause, crouch just enough to let Eden toddle toward him, small hands reaching without hesitation. He never initiated it, but he never stopped it either. Tiana watched these moments from a careful distance, aware that safety here was conditional. That protection came with attention. That being seen meant being remembered. She was no longer invisible. Marcus returned to his work with the same precision as before. Deals closed. Decisions landed. Power moved where he directed it. But something in him had shifted. Not softened exactly but recalibrated. Like a weapon lowered just a fraction, still lethal, still controlled. Once, late in the evening, he stopped beside Tiana as she gathered Eden's things. "She still isn't afraid," he said. Tiana smiled faintly. "She knows what feels steady." Marcus nodded. "So do I." The words lingered between them, unfinished. Nothing had been fixed. The city was still dangerous. His world still unforgiving. Tiana still woke some nights with fear pressing hard against her ribs. But fear no longer ruled everything. In its place was something tentative. An understanding that power didn't always need distance to survive. That control could exist without cruelty. That innocence, once seen, couldn't be unseen. Eden laughed softly in her sleep, unaware of the balance she had altered. Marcus watched her for a moment longer than necessary, then turned back toward the city that still answered to him. What remained after fear wasn't peace. It was something more fragile than that.